Welcome. Today is the 27th. 27th? No, it's going to be the 28th. 28th day of Sivan? 27th day of Sivan, sorry. Today's the 27th day of Sivan, after we've got that cleared up. The 3rd of July. Now that I'm giving two classes again, so I remember that I already said at some point 27, but that was just this morning here in Israel. And now it's the afternoon still. It's still the 27th. Okay. And we're up to the fourth reading of Parshat Korach. This reading is the one that's probably the toughest. There is a plague that is the aftermath of this entire episode with Korach and his cohort. And we read that God says to Moses, we're looking at Numbers 17:9. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Remove yourself from this congregation, I will consume them in an instant." And Moses and Aaron fell on their faces, because they didn't know what to do now that God's wrath was coming. And so Moses said to Aaron, "Take the censer, the vessel into which you put the incense, put fire from the top of the altar in it, place incense in it, and take it quickly to the congregation and atone for them, for God's wrath has gone forth, and the plague has begun." And Aaron took the censer just as Moses said, and he ran into the midst of the community, and indeed the plague had begun among the people. He placed the incense on it and atoned for the people. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague ceased. The number of dead in the plague was 14,700, and this was all besides those who died because of the matter of Korach. Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the plague was stopped. And this is, apart from being a very difficult episode in terms of what happened, the point here is pretty clear. The point, at least in terms of the action that Aaron took, that Moses told him to take, to put incense in this vessel, the censer, to put incense there and to atone for the congregation, because the whole affair until now was regarding the incense itself, because that's how everything started. That Moses had told them, take 12 censers, each one with incense, each one for one of the tribes, and bring them all into the sanctuary. And because of this act of bringing incense that was not commanded, as it were, even though God told him to do this, but still, this was the aftermath, in the same way that this is what happened to Nadav and Avihu, if you remember, Aaron's older children, who brought incense without being told to, but not even, this was even easier in a certain respect. And there only they were punished. Here it's because it's from the entire congregation, because apparently what Korach and his cohort had done is they had awakened a lot of disruption within the people themselves in how they see Moses and Aaron and their divine mission. So the wrath came out on the entire people. But the point, as we said, is pretty clear. That the same thing that causes the death also atones and gives life. And that is the major lesson from all of this. And Rashi brings it down and he says, the people began to hate the incense because they had already seen what it had done to Nadav and Avihu. Now they're seeing what it did to all of them. And they come in and say, what do we need the incense for? Incense is destructive. It's always wrapped up in death and in suffering. Why even have this? Now, the incense is probably the most complex of all the services that was done in the temple, in the tabernacle. This is certainly true about what the high priest needs to do when he brings the incense into the Holy of Holies, into the inner sanctuary on Yom Kippur. The Talmud describes this in length in the tractate of Yoma, that this was the most difficult of all the services. How do you actually do it? Because he had a lot of things to carry in, and how do you actually manage all the things that he needed to bring into the Holy of Holies, plus this censer with incense? But it's not just that, it's the incense itself. The incense itself was made of 11 different types of herbs, and one of them is actually foul smelling. It's called chelbena. And the chelbena has a terrible acrid smell. And the incense was sweet to the smell. And so the whole trick of making the incense was, how do you combine these herbs, these spices together in a way that not only is the chelbena masked, but actually it contributes to the smell. So it's a very delicate task, and afterwards preparing it, even once the concoction was made, preparing it, grounding it down, was the lengthiest type of service. They did it, and they also spoke when they ground it down, which is a whole thing in and of itself. Why is the incense so complex? Because the incense represents our understanding. Our understanding of the world is very, very complex. Our understanding of Torah is also very complex. And a lot of people, and I don't want to get into what Paul said about this, but if you're a Christian, you know this. They look at the Torah and they say it's so complex. They look at the world and they say it's so complex. Maybe it's better not to be here. Maybe it's better not to engage in Torah. Because they look at the Torah and they say, look at how much can go wrong. Look at how many punishments there are if you do something wrong. They look at the world and they say, people today, maybe I shouldn't be bringing children into the world, because look at how complex and difficult this world is. And there's some validity to that argument, but comes God and says it's not true. It all depends on your intent. The same incense that is so complex to create and you think is related to destruction and to death and God's wrath is the same incense that fills the chamber with the sweet smell and atones for all the sins. Here, when Aaron brought it out, and every year on Yom Kippur. The same thing is true of the Torah. The same Torah that you say is so difficult to keep and so difficult to navigate and to follow properly. Why even bother with it, as Christianity claimed? It's better to just say we have no obligations. But that's not true. The Torah and everything that it obligates us to do is a source of peace. It's a source of joy. God doesn't look at it as, oh, this is some kind of very complex maze that you have to navigate. That's not the way He looks at it. In fact, there's a whole concept in Torah learning which is called Yagdil Torah v'Yadir, that we want to make it even more complex than what it is. Why? Because that's its beauty. It's not in order to get you. It's not in order to figure out how to catch you. It's not entrapment. On the contrary. But it depends on what point of view you come from. If you come from the point of view that the Torah is entrapment, then you're going to suffer from it. Then you're going to feel that everything is so difficult and everything turns on a dime and everything is so complex. And what if I do something wrong? But what God wants the Torah to be, what God wants life to be, is an opportunity to serve Him. It's the vehicle. It's like a car. You can say a car is terrible. Look at how many times you have to go to the shop to get it fixed and get it serviced. and this and that, and you're missing the whole point, which is that most of the time, if it's a good car, 99.9% of the time, you're using it to enrich your life, to make your life easier. Everything is that way. It depends on how you look at it. So the Torah, life, they're the vehicles by which we come closer to God. The incense, for all its complexity, was not meant to be an agent of destruction. Not at all. But some people used it the wrong way. And when you use it the wrong way, the way the manufacturer told you not to use it, then it breaks down. But it's not meant to be used that way. It's meant to be the instrument, the medium through which we connect ourselves to the infinite. And that's the real message of all of this. That in the end, the same incense that was the reason for Nadav and Avihu's death, for the death of these 14,700 people, is also the reason that millions are alive. The millions are atoned for. It's the same thing. It all depends on your point of view and what you want to do with it. If you want to use life as a vehicle for connecting to God, then life is good. If you want to use the Torah, if you want to engage in the Torah, if you want to study the Torah as a vehicle of connecting to God's infinite mind and will, then that's what it is. It's not a samamavet, as the sages call it. It's not an instrument of death. It's not a drug of death. That's not what it is. It's not the way you're supposed to look at it. Look at it as the most positive thing, the best thing that we have in our lives, the greatest gift. Ki lekach tov natati lechem. I gave you a good gift. A lekach is a gift. It's something that I gave you to take. I gave you to take this thing in order to use it in good health, to use it as a method of connecting to me. Thanks for joining today. Hope to see you tomorrow.